Hi, friends. This is Charles Galda, your host for Vision New England's Church in Action program. This week, we'll continue our conversation with Chris Goeppner of Riverbank Church in White River Junction, talking about the history of awakenings coming from New England, the impact they had on the world, and that maybe, just maybe, God might be starting to do something similar even today.
So Richard Allen and Lemuel Haynes were a very important part of the Second Great Awakening, as
and
was
Frederick Douglass.
Frederick Douglass, absolutely.
Right? Hugely important voice.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that Second Awakening, I would say your first awakening is hallmarked by boldness. Your second awakening is hallmarked by prayer, very, very much prayer movements. The third awakening, though, from my studies, and again, there's probably, I wouldn't say I'm a true church historian. It's a hobby. I'm a hobbyist.
Avocation.
Correct. But you can tell I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
Right? The third awakening, though, obviously coming out of the Civil War, I just couldn't imagine that, by the way, what it would have been like. We think it's hostile now. There's tensions and sides. Could you imagine that? Again, the gospel, though. The gospel stands out in those moments, those cultural moments. And lo and behold, the man, the myth, the legend from Northfield, Massachusetts, he rises up as a voice, D.L. Moody. Yeah. D.L. Moody has a lot of George Whitefield in him. If you were to read Whitefield's writings compared to Edwards, you'd be like, Edwards is hard to read. Whitefield, I can read him. Okay. He's more, he gets, by academics, they say he's a simpleton, but for a lay person, that he's a lot. It's the same with our friend D.L. Moody. You can read he's a simpleton. He has a second, third grade education, Northfield, Massachusetts, goes to Boston. You've seen the plaque where he's given his life to Jesus in Boston, but he moves westward to Chicago as a business opportunity. But in Chicago, just after the Civil War, and he was really involved in a lot of the healing of the Civil War as a businessman, but also as a bivocational pastor. And as he was serving people, he would have his meetings on Sunday evening, on Sunday afternoons. There was one particular Sunday afternoon, I don't know if you've heard this story, Charles, where he's preaching and he preaches the gospel and he says, and I want you to ponder on this. And next week when we come back, I want you to consider following Jesus. It was minutes after that moment, the fire bells rang and the Great Chicago Fire consumed blocks and blocks and blocks of the city, even the building in which they were meeting in. Many people who were in that room were affected. Most, if not all, were, and many died. And that was a very shifting moment for D.L. Moody that affects New England. And here's how. D.L. Moody from there said, I will never preach the gospel without giving an opportunity for people to respond. And it, I believe, began the Third Great Awakening in America. He took the country by storm, and he was an average guy. He was a shoe salesman with a second and third grade education, and he made his way back to New England. He did a lot of work in Boston.
It's just like Paul. It wasn't with eloquent words.
Correct.
God.
Yes.
Right.
And he preached in New England. He moved pretty much all of his ministry back to Northfield. He started a movement, the volunteer movement with college students out of Northfield. He started a seminary for women, which was an incredibly new idea for that time. I mean, who does this? And he created, obviously it was the Mount Hermon School for Boys.
Yeah. And
out of that was all the Third Great Awakening. He was such an impacting voice in that moment. And that was right out of the Civil War.
Then this is the same time A.J. Gordon shows up on the scene and he starts going to college, what becomes and starts something called the Evangelistic Association of New England.
How cool is that?
Vision New England's real name.
That's right.
And we used to bring Dwight Moody down to Boston to do the mass revivals, and thousands of people. One of the manifestations of Tremont Temple we built for Dwight Moody to share the gospel because so many people would come.
And this is so cool, right? It was this little boy. I've read his one of the best Moody books is a biography written by Wilbur Smith, and he talks about young Moody when he was living in Northfield, and he would have, because his father died, he'd have to walk all the way to Greenfield, Mass. And many of your viewers and listeners are probably familiar with that Connecticut Valley region. It's an hour south of me, but that was very formational for him. He started to see the value of hard work and willing to go and do different things. There was like a resilience, and that marked the Third Great Awakening, was resilience coming out of the Civil War. And then, of course, you have Vision New England, or the Evangelistic Association of New England. That was one of many that were kind of sprouted up out of the work of D.L. Moody and, of course, Billy Sunday.
Yeah,
Billy Sunday, the Major League Baseball player who had had an encounter with the Lord. He leaves his career to become a firebrand. He got a lot of people mad, I'll tell you what.
And someone we also partnered with.
That's right.
To bring the gospel to, and hundreds of thousands of people heard it through our partnership.
It's funny, we've talked about this. There are people that we know right now whose grandparents gave their lives to Jesus in a Billy Sunday crusade in the Third Awakening.
Yeah. And did I tell you, now this gets into the 20s, so maybe I'm getting ahead of you. How far up do we want to go?
So the Third Awakening would go from the 1860s all the way to the 1910s. And again, cultural moments always define these, are really important. And you would have, it's almost like a crescendo of cultural moments. You would have the Spanish flu. You would have the First World War.
Yeah.
And then spinning out of that is like this big gap. You've got the Roaring 20s, right? But then you have the Depression. And so there's almost like this dull period between awakenings. And this one in particular would be like the Roaring 20s.
Did I tell you about Gypsy Smith? Do you know who that is?
Yeah, Gypsy Smith. He was the New York evangelist. Yeah.
I never heard of him before. But we brought him to Boston for the big mass revival. 300,000 people, the newspaper published, came out to hear the gospel for the weeks or however long he was there. And I was talking to Gordon MacDonald about it. He says, yeah, Gypsy Smith was huge, but he gets lost because of the Depression.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
And it was like a scratch to the itch. And that's the thing. Let's go to this, Charles. Awakenings, it's not like the gospel quit. It's not like Jesus quit, and it's like the churches quit. It's just, I think there's cultural moments that take all of the headlines. There's cultural moments that it's almost like a seismic shift in the world, and you can see how these great awakenings. And I didn't get into in the Third Awakening, I didn't get into the Azusa revival on the West Coast. I mean, that's a huge part of it. Richard Seymour, African-American evangelist, and it was very charismatic and Pentecostal, but that fit the westward expansion. You can look at it, and that happened at the same time as what was going on with Billy Sunday, what was happening with Gypsy Smith. There's a lot of effect there in that moment, that cultural moment. And then, of course, World War II comes, rocked the world. This is one of the more interesting as we enter into the Fourth Great Awakening to me, because I was impacted by the Fourth Great Awakening, and you were impacted by the Fourth Great Awakening.
And give me the time frame of because there's a little bit of disagreement about how many awakenings we've had and stuff like that. But what time frame are you talking about with Fourth Great Awakening?
This one would be post World War II, and I believe that the Fourth Great Awakening started out of, and I talked to Gordon MacDonald a little bit about this because he was around then. He lived in New York City when all the GIs were coming back from the battle, from the war. And they arrived in New York City, and there was an evangelist named Jack Wyrtzen who had come out of the Great Depression and the Roaring 20s. He was kind of a big band guy, kind of a party guy, had an incredible encounter with the Lord. And out of that, he saw an opportunity with all these GIs coming back from World War II. And he started reaching them as they were coming off the boats and said, hey, come to come to the Garden, Madison Square Garden, come to Penn Station, come to Central Park. And they were having similar to what Billy Sunday and Gypsy Smith and D.L. Moody, these great revival camp meetings in the city. And Jack Wyrtzen was in my opinion, from my research, was the great catalyst of the Fourth Great Awakening when you can actually read this in Billy Graham's autobiography, which, by the way, if you've never read it, it's awesome. Yeah. And he talks a lot about this moment because this is where he was kind of introduced to evangelism, mass evangelism, and it was through Jack Wyrtzen. So, of course, Billy Graham would be the defining personality of the Fourth Great Awakening, but it started in New York City with all these GIs coming back to the country. Can you imagine that?
And what's the time, Chris, when does that run to, would you say, as best?
Yeah.
Again, not science, it's a little bit of art.
Fourth Great Awakening, 46, 47, 48. Billy Graham really started engaging in 1948 in his crusades.
And when does it continue till?
I would say in my opinion, and again, this is just my humble hobbyist opinion. Yep. I believe we saw out of the Fourth Awakening a longer movement. And here's why. The Fourth Awakening is marked by creativity. It's the most creative use of any communication mediums you can imagine. Billy Graham embraced everything, whether it was newspaper, radio, whether it was TV and movies. He would do anything and everything to leverage that for a message to go out. And so I believe that's what elongated the Fourth Great Awakening. And you would have in that Fourth Awakening a multitude of voices, but Billy Graham was the kind of the crown jewel. But you would have in that period of time, you had some great movements. For example, I would say in the civil rights era, you would have John Perkins as an amazing voice to that Fourth Awakening. Yep. One that still to this day, Dr. Perkins still preaches the gospel and preaches the gospel of justice. He's an amazing voice from the same Fourth Awakening period. He was in the 50s and 60s.
And so we're getting Martin Luther King out of this.
Yeah.
Medgar Evers, right? We're all of these big civil rights names are coming out of it too then.
Right. I would say you would have in the 60s, maybe the most important part of the Fourth Great Awakening would be the Jesus Revolution, the movie, the Chuck Smith kind of, it's a counterculture movement of the church that never has happened on this soil, where you have somebody say, hey, let's change our methods so that we can reach young people who are killing themselves, overdosing and going. And that would be the Jesus People movement. That was the 60s, and that would be Calvary Chapel. So you have the civil rights, you have a lot of moving parts here. And then you would enter into, I know this is kind of funny, but the CCM Christian music movement was a big part of it. Youth groups were exploding. I mean, I was a youth pastor at the tail end of the Fourth Awakening, I believe. And it was just really interesting to see that the gospel was, I could go to public schools, Charles, and preach the gospel. They would roll out red carpet, like, please, our kids need this message. And we would see, I remember one time in particular, and this is like in the late 90s, we would bring Krispy Kreme donuts to the public high school, 4,000 students. And they'd say, yeah, you can have the cafeteria, you can have the gym, you can give away whatever you want, you can talk about whatever you want, just make sure it's positive. But that was, what a mark of that. I think that was the tail end of the Fourth Great Awakening as we led to 9/11, another cultural moment.
Now we talked about that we value our history in New England. So, and I mentioned before that one of my strength finders is context. I need to know how we got here. So we value it for those reasons, but there's something bigger to it, I think. And this goes back to a professor I had at Dallas Seminary. I love the way he would say this. He would say, what God has done in the past, Dr. James Allman, what God has done in the past is a model and a promise of what he will do in the future, but he's much too creative to do the same thing the same way twice.
It's a good
So
word.
awakening has come again and again and again.
Yep.
And maybe there's still another awakening out there in the pattern.
Yeah. It seems that way, doesn't it? And again, let's think about these cultural moments.
Yep.
I think this is an important piece. As I walk through, again, my hobbyist view is I believe we've had four. I believe the fourth awakening was kind of bookended with a 9/11. I really do. I think that changed everything. And again, as adults that walk through that, I was in my 30s when that happened, and it was just like a very defining cultural moment. And we've seen some effects from it over time. There's also another cultural moment that we've lived through, and I think it's maybe bookending the fifth, and that's the COVID pandemic. I genuinely, yeah, you've seen it. I've seen it. I talk to pastors all over the country, not just our own. And I look, I'm very immersed here in New England. I talk to pastors all over New England, and we can all agree something is happening right now.
Yeah.
And I believe, again, cultural moments. And I think we're seeing something. There's a generation that has a lot of curiosity to the gospel. We have a generation right now who came out of a really weird. I had two young high school sons in COVID. It messed them up, man.
Yeah.
It messed me up.
Yeah.
You know, everything about that. And I think that cultural moment is really what we have to look at. Is like God uses those.
Yeah.
To
and I think
serve a need within people.
And I think you can couple it, especially when it comes to this younger generation, which we see very unusual things happening specifically with this younger generation. And we'll be sharing some data at some point that validates this sense that we have that God's doing something very different here, is the end of the secular experiment. We've the end, and it's a dead end and a failure, and young people are willing to recognize it and say it and start looking for something else. And the thing that I've loved in so many of the stories I've heard from pastors like you is, so these two young people, two teenagers showed up in our church uninvited. That's the common theme about this is that people are showing up. We've got, we should invite people to church. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but we've got all those plans to invite. And yet God is doing some inviting of his own without any of us. Yeah.
You know, Charles, I had a distinct honor to preach at a church in Charlestown, Massachusetts, Boston, in November. And it's a 393-year-old church. 393. They're celebrating their 393rd birthday here this month. And one of the things that I was taken back by was that church has seen all of these, all of them. And this is one of the coolest stories I've ever heard. Is this church is one of the original 6 Harvard churches. Okay. When Boston was being established, when they started Harvard College, and they called it Cambridge Harvard College, there was built around churches. John Harvard was a teaching pastor at this church.
Okay.
And they've survived. All 6 churches are around in some form or fashion, but this one has survived, still preaching the gospel.
Wow.
And to be able to preach in that church and to share Jesus publicly and to stir them up with, I told them some of the stories that I've shared with you today. In particular, their church, George Whitefield preached in their church 3 different times.
Wow.
And to be able to share, this is what I left them with. I said, why not now? Why not now?
And I would even say maybe now.
I think we're all living in a place of like, I think something's happening. And again, revival and awakening is not a concert.
Yeah.
It's not a camp meeting for a week. It's what you mentioned earlier. It's like a contagion, a spiritual contagion. Something is happening, and you can't quite put your thumb on it. Yeah. We just know we have an advantage to look backwards and say, hey, that's what they called it. Yeah. We've had 4 of them here. And I think that's what we're seeing now. Yeah. And one of the things that Billy Graham says about awakening, he says, this is really cool. He says, look, people have, what they live in changes. Their jobs change, like generationally, it's different. The culture changes, but he says that the need of people, spiritual need of people, never changes.
Yeah.
And our message never changes. So therefore, there's always going to be an opportunity for another awakening. Yeah. And I believe, from what I know, and especially here in New England, I believe God's doing something really unique, and maybe we can call it an awakening. Yeah. Yeah. And you get to hear more stories than I do from your chair, because you work in the space, you work in the church networking and connectivity space. There's something happening.
Yeah. Yeah, very clearly. And I think we're starting to see data that validates that too, right? There's a spiritual sense, there's an anecdotal sense, and now I think we're seeing an empirical sense. Yeah. And so, Chris,
hey, can I say something real quick?
Yep.
I have a really great opportunity to network with a lot of different churches and church networks in the region. And one area in particular in New England that doesn't get the headlines in our space, maybe in a more traditional, maybe like Baptistic or Presbyterian or non-denominational. The Spanish-speaking church in New England is on fire right now. I talked to a guy yesterday.
Immigrant churches, even more broadly, I think,
exploding, right? And I was talking to a guy yesterday who works specifically with Spanish-speaking churches in New England, and he says we can't keep up with the demand.
Yeah.
We're just doing anything and everything we can to empower leaders to lead so that they can understand what it is to serve in the church. And maybe there's a call in there that we can fan the flames up and send them to plant churches. They're planning 2 in New Hampshire this year. Wow. Spanish-speaking churches, because the demand is so high. How exciting is that?
Very exciting. So Chris, 2 more minutes left.
Yep.
Let me ask you a separate question. Mm-hmm. I'd love you to hear, and this goes to the point about God's doing something. Can you share for us something, whether it's in your own life or your church or something you've experienced or seen that is a story of God doing something exciting to you?
Yeah, I got a great story. So we started announcing we baptize every month or so, and we had a outreach last month. It was your typical trunk or treat outreach. And this is at our Claremont location in New Hampshire. And we had a lot of people show up. One particular family shows up, and there's a guy in the group who is traveling through on the Appalachian Trail. And he came with the family to the trunk or treat that night. And he went into the building, our church building, to use the restroom. And we had a poster in there for baptism. Well, what we didn't know was that on the Appalachian Trail, this guy had an encounter with the Lord. He grew up in the church, kind of left his faith, on a shelf. But on the Appalachian Trail, he had an encounter with the Lord. And on that hike up the east coast of America, as he came into New England, he said the Holy Spirit spoke to him and said, "It's time for you to go public with your faith now and be baptized." Wow. He shows up. This is crazy. He wasn't even supposed to be there. He shows up. He goes to the bathroom. He sees this. He's like, "I got to finish my hike, but I'm coming back for that baptism." And lo and behold, this weekend, he goes public with his faith. An Appalachian walker who said, "I had an encounter with Jesus on the Appalachian Trail, and now I want everybody to know that I believe in Jesus." That's just so like, huh? Does that really happen? And it really happened. So yeah, I'd say that's a cool story.
Those are the ones we can't take any credit for because we weren't even there for
it. How in the world? And he was able to testify that to our church community this weekend. How cool is that?
Yeah. Chris, thank you so much for your heart for evangelism, for your ministry at Riverbank, for your broader impact across New England on church planting and evangelism, and your work at Vision New England, and the national ways you serve too. And thank you for letting us benefit from all the hard work you've done into the patterns of New England awakening, to help us whet our appetites a little bit about what God might do.
Yeah. And here's the question. He can do it again. Is he doing it again? I think maybe he is.
Maybe. Yep.
To be a part of it, how humbling, right? Thank you, Charles.
Amen. Thank you, brother. God bless you.
You too.
This program is created by Vision New England, which helps the church work in unity to make disciples, do justice, and share Jesus, to accelerate evangelism so that New England will be transformed. You can find additional resources and partner in our mission at visionNewEngland.org. This program is brought to you by our friends at the Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide. Join us next Sunday at 2 p.m. on Life Changing Radio. Thanks so much, and God bless you.
At Leadership Transformations, we believe that when you have the right resources to help you slow down and experience a deep and refreshing connection to God, you can become the discerning leader you know you are created to be. Friends, Steve Macchia here, and I have a free gift for your soul. It's called Pathways. Pathways is our weekly email aimed at offering you soul-nourishing content for the journey. It contains readings, prayers, spiritual practices, a link to the Discerning Leader podcast, as well as information about all of our upcoming soul care retreats, workshops, and online offerings. So head on over to leadershiptransformations.org today and sign up for this free resource. It will help you slow down and be more. God bless you, friends.